The conventional wisdom, if you read the reports on Davos, it was framed really from, I think it was a PwC report that found that a vast majority of CEOs attending Davos expect a recession this year. So the environment going in is quite gloom. Having said that, in day-to-day conversations and in meetings, you don't have the same degree of pessimism that these surveys showed. So I think actually there is this array of sunshine within this gloomy and this cold and snowy weather that we're going through. For our country, Greece,
Well, before you go to Greece, we have to say that everybody says that 2023 energy prices will remain high. So maybe the estimations are not that bad for inflation, but there will be a slow recovery. So we would like to know, because you have a better aspect and opinion on that project. Greece has been listed among the winner countries in terms of progress, economic progress. So could you give us a whole insight of the Greek economy?
Thank you so much. So we have these extraordinary moments, I would say, for the Greek economy last year. The Economist magazine did a ranking of 34 OECD countries based on various criteria and found Greece at the top. The Economist Intelligence Unit, which is actually separate to the Economist, the Economist Intelligence Unit did their annual survey of business environment rankings for 91 countries and found that Greece had jumped more places than any other country in the world. And actually the European Commission, in their winter forecast, say that Greece's debt to GDP will drop more between 2019 and 2023 than any other EU country. So we are very happy to watch these developments, and they're particularly significant that they're happening amidst global uncertainty. I think it's particularly significant for Greece that the country is doing relatively well when there are these global shocks. And you identified two shocks, the energy shock and the interest rate shock. And if I may have a couple of minutes to talk about each of these shocks. The energy shock is actually quite a mature shock at this point. It started in the summer of 2021 when energy prices started going up, particularly natural gas prices. And for a country like Greece, this was a big shock because it immediately translated into higher cost of living for both households and businesses. The government, as you know, went through various support schemes. I won't bore you with the details, but we feel fairly comfortable in terms of the support that was given to households and to businesses to help them ride through this storm. Fortunately, energy prices, particularly natural gas prices, have now fallen dramatically. And there's various theories as to why that has happened. I would say, if I were to pick one event, it's that storage percentages actually went up for a few weeks during winter. So in theory, in winter, it's cold, so you draw down on your storage. But this time, the weather, and for various other reasons, the opposite has happened. In Greece,
so what was the real impact on the Greek economy of the energy crisis? I mean, at what point the Greek economy was affected by that?
I would say that if you look, it's actually an interesting question and a difficult question. I would say you would have to look primarily at inflation to determine the biggest negative impact. So it would be spring and summer of 22 is when the real big hit was felt. But according to data that was recently published, Greece's consumption of natural gas actually went down 19% in 22. And importantly, we have increased exports of LNG nearly 3 times. This is little that hasn't received enough attention in Greece, but we were able to help Bulgaria and other countries, and through the LNG terminals that exist and the ones that are being built, Greece is also becoming an exporter of LNG. But so the bulk of the energy shock is behind us. If you look at headline inflation in Greece, it's fallen. It's now 7.6%. versus 9.2 in the euro area average. And so hopefully this will continue in the months ahead. Of course, this is not an easy situation.
So it's better than estimated.
Yes, it's better than estimated. It's not an easy, it remains a difficult situation for the more vulnerable amongst us, particularly as it relates to food. And we need to be careful when we talk about these things, that we cannot just talk about the average. There is always, within the average, there are segments that are really suffering. And we as a government and as society need to always think of those people who are less fortunate than us. So the government, as you know, has also done this new support scheme that will start soon to support households in their supermarket purchases.
Mr. Patelis, Greece has seen its biggest improvement in the business environment as well in 3 years. So what about future investments? Are you afraid they will slow down because we're heading to double elections?
So we're here in Davos partly to bring in more investment. I will remind you.
And how are you doing so far?
I will remind you that, the Microsoft investment started in January 2020 with a meeting of the Prime Minister, and the Google investment really was sealed in May 22. So I'm hopeful that this Davos will bring something important as well. And of course, in 22, we've had a record inward foreign direct investment for Greece. We reached a multi-decade record. And this is, again, despite global energy crisis, interest rates, etc. So in response to your question, I am optimistic that Greece will be able to attract more investment despite the global environment. And actually, also despite the double elections, if you look at the stock market, for example, in Greece, it's been doing very well recently. And to some degree, I think that if I put my previous hat as an analyst on, I think that we are living a repeat of 2019, when the market discounted the new government coming into power months before the elections actually took place. So in 23, we have two significant events for Greece. The first is the double elections, and a lot of investors want to see that there is political stability. And the second is investment grade, and a lot of investors want to see Greece achieving investment grade.
So in your opinion, they're not reluctant in investing in Greece because of political instability, for example?
No, I think that a lot of investors view Greece, I know it sounds difficult sometimes for the Greeks to believe in this, but they view Greece as a country that's different to the rest of the world, but this time in a positive way, not in a negative way. And political stability is considered now one of our assets as opposed to one of our risks.
The European economy is definitely affected by the war in Ukraine. So are you afraid of more risks in case of further escalation of this conflict?
We can't predict the future, and the job of any government is to take what's going on outside its own borders and do the best of that situation. So I'm not a military or war analyst, so I have no better forecast than anybody in this room as to how the situation will unfold. But I would say that it has had also some positive medium-term effects on the whole world, in the sense that, first of all, there has been a united response against Russia, much more united than a lot of people would have forecasted. And even Greece, which traditionally had the Greek people have warm feelings towards the Russian people, yet we stood on the right side of history to support Ukraine against this invasion. Secondarily, it woke up a lot of people to the risks of being dependent on one particular energy provider and the importance of diversification. But thirdly, and more importantly, the surge in energy prices has also awoken the world to the need to accelerate the transition to new types of fuels. My understanding is that today in Greece there's a good chance that the vast majority of our electricity is going to be produced from renewable energy sources. So this is the future. The future is actually happening faster than we believe. And our own country is blessed with sun and wind and has a unique opportunity to develop these new energy sources, and not only for its own security and its own economy, but also for its connection to the rest of the world, and ultimately to strengthen also its national security through this interconnectedness to other countries.
Since you're talking about the future, can you be more specific? Which reforms will go through in the immediate future?
You mean in general?
By the Greek government?
So I would say there are a number of projects that are ongoing that might seem that they are, let's say, already decided, but there is a lot of implementation, a lot of hard work. And in those broad categories, I would put green and digital. So there's an enormous amount of projects going on. Digital, for example, digitizing all the documents of the state. This just takes time. And by the way, this will provide a lot of jobs for people who will be literally digitizing these documents. Green, we have a lot of investments to make and a lot of projects within the RRF that are at the implementation stage. In terms of reforms, a big area of focus is going to be justice. If you ask people what business people or other people, what is their primary problem with investing in Greece, it used to be a few years ago in 2019, they would tell you the taxes are too high, and they would tell you there's too much red tape. And they would also tell you, we don't know what's going to happen. And those three things are gone. Taxes have been lowered, there's much less red tape, and there's political stability. So if you ask the same people today, they'll probably mention justice as one of the top of their concerns, and it's something that the government needs to work on. And then, of course, the labor force. Today, business people would tell you that they don't have, it's not as easy to find people to employ. Of course, we would tell them, increase your wages to find more people. But there are other things that the government can and should do, including skilling and reskilling and upskilling. There's a lot of programs. For example, DIPA has recently launched a program for digital and green skills, both for unemployed and for employed people. And it's extraordinary, the response that I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have applied for these programs. So there's an incredible desire for people to acquire these new skills for the new workforce, and it's an obligation of the government to provide them.
So these are a few plans that will go through in case of re-elections?
Yeah, that. Also, there's a continued. There has been, the digitization of the Greek state, as you know, is an ongoing project. But with the digitization, what you also need to do is simplify the processes and simplify the way the government, the civil sector works, so that digitization allows you to do things faster and easier. So eventually you need the structure also to reflect this new reality. And then a very big focus is going to be the health system. The health system in Greece, during COVID, we all knew that the health system in Greece has problems. But during COVID, we discovered, that we faced a real life situation of the problems the country has. And so there needs to be more investment in hospitals, and of course, big focus on prevention. We were at a meeting today, and we were told that globally, 97% of the spend of governments goes to treating diseases, so when you go to hospital or whatever, and only 3% on prevention. And this is a very skewed percentage that needs to be readdressed. We all need to do more on prevention as well.
Well, the pandemic actually has been a very big lesson for everyone. I would like to come back to not only your plans ahead, but also the fact that we're living in a world of instability and economically, and based on your experience, which one do you think will be the biggest challenge in the future for Greece? As we see, for example, in a globalized environment, more and more countries like the United States are actually investing on reinforcing their own economies.
So we're talking like 10-year, what horizon did you have in mind?
Well, shorter, I think.
Oh, shorter, okay. There is a big discussion at the European level, and this is what you were alluding to, and actually very big, probably the most popular topic in Davos today is how will Europe respond to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act of the United States. Now, for those who don't know, the Inflation Reduction Act has got nothing to do with inflation reduction, but it's just an act that effectively subsidizes U.S. companies on green projects if they basically do them in the United States and not elsewhere. So it's purest form of protectionism, of course, with a good aim, which is to help in this climate transition. And we should not...
It's a contradiction because we're in Davos, globalized event, and we see...
Localized thing.
Exactly.
And we should not, lose sight that in order to fight climate change and to bring the world to net zero, everybody needs to contribute. The United States, Europe, China, everybody. So we cannot ignore big and broadly speaking, if one particular region is working hard towards these objectives, we should all be happy, even if we're not part of it. Now, but there is a big debate, and the conventional wisdom in the EU is twofold. One is that there also needs some kind of temporary suspension of state aid rules as they relate to these investments. Otherwise, there will be no investments in Europe. And the second, of course, is related to this, that how do we ensure that smaller countries like Greece, who have less fiscal space, how do we ensure that they also participate in this? And there's a debate that has started now as to whether they can be an additional funding tool at the EU level. Now, this is not an easy debate because obviously the RRF, which is the main funding tool that was created for the pandemic, is still ongoing. It's only been 2 years. So for a country like Germany or other countries from the core, it's quite difficult to accept.
So you're afraid that Europe is not going to have a united response once more? I'm
a generally optimistic person by nature. But so I suspect that eventually we will find the right thing. It just always takes longer than you think, then it's not going to be something like in 1 month.
But we're also running out of time. Anyway, so Mr. Patelis, leaving Davos and returning back to Greece, what is the most important thing you're bringing?
You mean to who, though? In general, you mean?
To the country.
I think... It's difficult to answer this question without sounding, well, I'll answer the question and then you can tell me what you think. So I think it's, for people in Greece, it's difficult to believe how changed the global perception is of their country. And so there is a lot of admiration for what is happening in Greece. And I'm not just talking about the government here, I'm talking in general, and of the difficulties that the Greek people endured and how they survived and came out of a very long crisis. And it used to be that a lot of countries would think that Greece was an exception, but then a lot of countries are going through crises themselves for various reasons. And of course, there's these global crises, the COVID, the energy crisis, etc. And so now there's a lot more appreciation for crises.
Achievement.
Yes. And how do societies stay together? Because the Greek society did, at the end of the day, stay together and united, despite all the problems in the interim. When you look at the big picture, the country survived. And of course, there is a lot of interest in Greece from that aspect. And then there is interest in Greece from the investment aspect. And the investment aspect has various layers. There's let's invest in Greece because it's an interesting market, but there's also the geography, that it's a country that is at a very interesting geographical location, political stability that I mentioned before, that it's a country that if you invest in, your investment will be secure relative to if you were to invest in another neighboring country. There is the talent that Greece has, that there's a labor force that's well educated and with a pool of people outside Greece in the diaspora. There is, of course, the green angle. That Greece has sun and wind. There's the tourism angle. There's the logistics angle. There's many different angles which make Greece interesting. So we bring back also just many different ideas and many different companies that are interested in working in Greece.
Is it difficult for Greece to remain among the winners, the winner countries in economic terms? And what do we need to do for that, to secure that?
Re-elect the government? Just kidding. Just kidding. So it's... well, it's probably easier than we think, let's put it that way, than we ourselves think. I think we lost a lot of, we meaning Greece, lost a lot of self-confidence during the crisis, and we have not necessarily gained it back. And I think that if we just continue the way we're doing, I think we will be harvesting the fruits of our labor quite soon. So, for example, being upgraded to investment grade, this is something that will happen unless we just do something really bad between now and the end of the year. So there's a lot of stuff that's in motion that we just need to continue doing. Is it more difficult for Greece than for another country? We're a smaller country, but we have various advantages as well. So we have to play to our advantages. As I said, I am very optimistic on Greece.
So if you could summarize the result of the Davos conference this time for Greece, what would you say?
In 2019, it was a government that had come to power and that was pitching this idea that it was going to be different, that it would cut taxes, do reforms, and there was a lot of interest in that idea, but people were a bit cautious because they weren't sure if the government would deliver. That was January 2020. Then in 21, we had the pandemic. In 22, it was a rushed Davos because people didn't know if it'll happen. This time around, I would say it's a more mature Davos. So people recognize Greece's achievements and are very interested in figuring out how to participate in this story. So it's a very different environment to before.
Well, Mr. Patelis, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you all.